yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Duarte, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, the panel. So I want to echo so much of what we've heard today in concerns with China and their competitiveness and their buying of our natural resources. But at this point, it might be echo, echo, echo. So I want to touch on a few other related matters that threaten American working families' food access and our national food security. Currently, we're seeing produce crops. There were $4 billion in imports from Mexico in 2000. Today, there are about 20 million tons of produce crops coming in from Mexico. We know that the avocado industry and other fresh produce industries are being capitalized by the drug cartels. We know the drug cartels are enjoying our open border policy, partnering with China for fentanyl and other sources. We also know that Mexico is aligning itself politically, as is a great deal of Central and South America, with China. Our produce industry is being recapitalized in Mexico, currently providing significant imports to American consumers. I'm very concerned that those exports aren't always going to flow to American consumers, and once our produce industry is replaced, we'll have little to say about it. Am I valid in that concern? I know. Kip, Ambassador, why don't you jump in?
Repeat the last part of that question again.
Is America subject to seeing its produce supply from Mexico diverted to China at any moment China decides they need that supply?
You know, as I witnessed in my time at Mission, we see these BRIC nations line up oftentimes together, and they'll do anything to cut the U.S. out of a supply chain and move in another direction. Anything they can affect us economically, they'll do it, but it could be a threat. It just depends on supply chains and getting agricultural supply chains. My biggest risk is what I see in your home state of California, of how you're moving agriculture out oftentimes, especially in the vegetable, the permanent crops. It's moving other places around the world. But my concern about products coming out of Mexico is, are they produced with the chemicals or with the products that are approved in the United States? I'm not sure we track it all as well as we should.
Yeah. The other issue we have is here in the United States. I mean, we talk about intellectual property theft and how that hurts American companies in China, but we're losing intellectual property value here in America. We've addressed it in this committee several times, the USDA. They're just not approving our advanced farm chemistries. We have companies spending enormous amounts of money developing new tools for us, and we can't get our own USDA to approve them. Meanwhile, the patents tick away, and these crop protection companies lose their incentives to invest in American farm tools in the future. Am I on track there?
If you look on the crop care side, it's been almost 40 years since we've had a new mode of action come into the marketplace. That just shows how slow it is. It takes 18 years to bring a new chemistry to the market and hundreds of millions of dollars to get it there. I don't know if it's a funding issue or personnel issue.
I think it's just incompetence and disinterest in approving farm chemical tools. Another question. I just came from a natural resources hearing I stepped out to about offshore oil drilling. We're not exploring oil in America. We're not building our electric grid. We're focusing trillions towards green energy boondoggles, in my opinion. If you were advising an ag chem company to put in a major ag chemical or fertilizer plant, or pharmaceutical for that matter, or any kind of chemical precursors, would you in good conscience advise them to build that plant in America today, given our energy policies?
Well, as a producer, I want them here, but when I know our energy policy that's under this current administration, no.
And this is a 20-year plant. So a friendly administration may or may not sway a 20-year investment, maybe a 50-year investment. So,
you know, I can't tell you what their investment thesis is, but I know this. It's very capital intense to bring these plants back to the United States. But again, whether it's here or to our allies, we need to work together to do this.
So as China's growing its carbon economy, we hear about the coal plants, we know about the oil, we know about the rest of the world drilling oil. And America's choosing not to have a carbon economy. Our working families are struggling. We've got cereal companies advertising breakfast cereal for dinner now. Is our biggest problem China, or our own policies the biggest problem for American consumers today?
Sir, it's our own policies. And whether it's energy or whether it's food, and what we're doing in the regulatory environment, what we're trying to do, whether it's trying to solve climate, as some people say we're doing, or what we're trying to do in nutrition, this is going to affect those that can least afford it the most. I know we have people who are coming out trying to sell climate programs to us. They say, well, they're going to absorb it. It gets handed on to the consumer. Same goes with this energy policy. It's going to get handed on to the consumer.
So while China's upper middle class is growing, their disposable income's growing, their purchase power parity is already bigger than the American working families. They're not eating our lunch because they're buying our land. They're eating our lunch because we're feeding it to them. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. Now recognize Mr. Nunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and appreciate this panel hanging with us throughout this day. This is a very important conversation for all of us. Look, as a former counterintelligence officer, someone who served on the NSC as well, I want to say the threat is real and it's often overlooked in the ag community. I appreciate the chairman putting this together and having a discussion on the direct impact. I just got off the China Commission where we talked about harvesting organs that China is trying to sell around the world. Harvesting our own agriculture and the threat that that poses is direct, it's real, and it's now. Mr. Gagnon, thank you first and foremost for what you do with the Soybean Association. You are part of a team of tireless workers who are in the field producing and providing for not just America, but the entire country. Iowa, Illinois, others, we all are part of this team together. And so I'm proud of what we've been able to export with the U.S. agriculture being soybeans #1 in the field for our ag exports. The challenge is 60% of that is going to China today. Talk to us a little bit about what we should be doing here in Congress to help diversify that and ensure that we're not dependent on a sole customer that could use this in a trade war against us.
Well, I talked about it. Thank you for the question, first of all. Appreciate you highlighting that important part of it as well and what we are doing as U.S. farmers to supply the world. But you're right, with that reliance, so much of that reliance on China, finding these new markets is critical. We have talked about MAP and FMD. Something I haven't mentioned yet is the new program from USDA under the Regional Agriculture Promotion Program, which is looking at markets in new and developing places that aren't traditionally reliant on MAP and FMD. Soy has applied for grants in that area as well. I think Congress continuing to value and realize the return on investment that we get from the MAP and FMD dollars. Right. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money when we ask for doubling of market access programs and an increase to foreign market development. But the need is there. The program has proven throughout the years that there is not enough funds there to meet the demand. We could always use more in building those new markets. So when we look at, possible challenges to the China market, depending on policy decisions here in the U.S., it's just important to keep those resources there and to increase them and bring that return back to farmers.
And it's not just our markets that we're able to sell to overseas. We've got real competition on the horizon right now. I mean, when we look at Brazil, which has been enabled with Chinese investment, they're now the lead producer of soybeans. This is a threat that we're going to be competing with others who are subsidizing their market to go after these same markets. Is that correct?
That's correct. And, some may have been to Brazil. If you've ever had a chance to visit there, you can just see the tremendous opportunity they have to continue to increase their production, both through just putting more acres or hectares into production and adding new land to that, but also they're increasing their yield. They're spending money on research as well, which is something we spoke about earlier. So they're getting better at what they're doing. There are improvements to their infrastructure, whether it's highways or ports or rails. So they are making all the improvements that are going to put them in a better position around the world. So competing with that is crucial.
But I'd like to turn to you on the national security side. Look, we've looked at a number of things in this committee today about what we're doing in the state of Iowa. One, to stop China from buying farmland in the United States. It was highlighted with my friend Mr. Feenstra here. We're literally seeing people take the genetic material and replicate it in China by taking it from a farm field. This is happening in small business across the area. The Chinese government, as we learned today, has worked diligently to start mapping the DNA of humans within their country. It's fair to say they're coming after agriculture, whether it's grown in a field or grown in a barn. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. China is in the world of biologics. That's where they know the next round of technology goes, and especially big data and having artificial intelligence to pull it together and then innovate or try to innovate or steal innovation from us and leapfrog us, whether that's human biology or in the agricultural space.
I'm proud that we've been able to work together on the Protect Small Business and Prevent Illicit Financing Act, which I led to be able to pass, as well as what we're doing in the Cybersecurity and Agricultural Act. I want to highlight, with your work in the CFIUS, is there advantage from being able to really look at creating regional agricultural cybersecurity realms at our land grant and region schools, like Iowa State, on areas that can be really helpful? Because we now know that the top 3 sectors under attack, financial services, energy, and ag. The threat's real.
Absolutely. I think the expansion of our cybersecurity capabilities and knowledge is like imperative. China has built up in its military and divisions a cybersecurity warfare division that is constantly going at U.S. businesses. And given the prioritization of the 3 industries you mentioned, ag is where they're going, and they're going to do it, and they're going to put all the resources into it, and so we have to counter it. And that partnership that you've talked about, sort of building out that expertise, is imperative.
I really appreciate that. I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Gentleman's time expired. Now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is incredibly painful for me to compliment my friend from California due to his unreasonable advocacy for almond milk, but I feel that I must at this point. I want to reiterate his question and Mr. Tom's answer. Due to the Biden administration's war on energy, it would not be prudent for companies to start working on plants to provide nutrients and pest control agents in the United States right now. I don't think people quite understand what that means. Mr. Tom, thank you for pointing that out. We have to stay ahead of China, and the Biden administration can't get out of their own way. So that is incredibly important. I just want to make sure we didn't skip over that. So I also want to compliment the Biden administration for doing something that is absolutely amazing, that they have pulled off a foreign policy miracle and that they've driven China and Russia closer together since the death of Stalin. It sounds like a joke, but I'm not being trite. That is exactly what the Biden administration has done by their horrible foreign policy decision-making stuff. So I just want to ask a couple things about beans, if that's okay, because they're very important. And so we produce a lot in the 3rd Congressional District of the state of Wisconsin, and also corn. And I read all your guys' testimony in detail. Thank you so much for it. And I just have a question because, in fact, Brazil is eating our lunch because we're feeding it to them. Another good line from Duarte. Today's a good day for you, Duarte. So we had this huge problem when the previous administration did trade sanctions. It was like 27% or where the heck it was. But we've recovered since that, right? So now you're selling roughly the same amount of beans to China that you did before, even though Brazil has increased their capacity. There's a couple questions. If we had stuck with it, would that still be the case? Meaning, would China finally have come around and started to work with the United States because we stood firm for longer than one administration, in your opinion, sir?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, not being a foreign policy expert, might not have all the right answers here, but I think, so part of the recovery with that market was the Phase 1 agreement that the U.S. and China entered into to get back some of that market.
Right.
What we're seeing, though, is there's really no enforcement mechanism to that, unfortunately. So I would say we haven't seen a full recovery in that China market since 2018.
Yep.
Appreciate that a lot of it has come back under that agreement, but some of this long-term, what I call long-term damage to the U.S. reliability, I mean, we have historically been viewed as reliable suppliers around the world. And part of the negative part of the 2018 tariff deal that we might not get back is that full confidence that foreign markets across the world had in U.S. as a reliable provider.
And you know what? You can see that as a negative or a net positive. I see it as a net positive because the United States needs to be viewed as someone that's going to stand with democracy and freedom. And Xi Jinping, they've had multiple famines, as you pointed out, in the last century, and quite frankly, they don't care. The Soviet Union, they murdered essentially millions of people by starving them to death when they did collectivization. So I get it, and the Great Leap Forward during the Cultural Revolution is what you're referring to. So let me ask you this question. Do we as American farmers have more resiliency built into our systems because we are getting back to where we were? Do we have more resiliency built into our systems than Brazil has the potential to expand their capacity? And can we wait China out? China has to feed their people every day. So do we have the resiliency built into our systems that if we actually stuck to our guns like President Trump did and not fold the cards like President Biden did, if we stood strong, are we going to be able to maintain our industry?
That is tough to predict, sir. I'll start by saying that farmers across the country absolutely understand the critical issues that you're talking about here when it comes to China and China competitiveness and threats posed to American agriculture. So that's appreciated by growers. I believe that's the case, speaking for myself at least, and I'm sure others. To say that we have the entire resiliency, I mean, one thing I'll mention we haven't really talked about, the outlook for farm income over the next 2 to 5 years is not great.
It is.
Prices are dropping. The cost of inputs, may not be increasing as fast as they are, but our cost of production is generally going up.
So, Mr.
Our profitability is coming down.
Mr. Gacko, I'm sorry, I only have 20 seconds left. I
Sorry.
appreciate it completely. And we're not going to get inputs down until fuel cost goes down because everything's predicated on diesel fuel. You know that. It's got to get in the ground. It's got to get out. And one question for you, Mr. Tom. If you could go back in time, do you think the United States of America should be feeding Nazi Germany in 1938 before their invasion of Poland in 1939? Should we be providing them with food and aid?
Well, and bringing it up to, you want to talk about China today on that, or
Well,
you want to talk about Nazi
I want
Germany?
to highlight the fact that right now we are essentially feeding Nazi Germany in 1938. And do you think that that's an appropriate use of American resources? Would it have been then, and is it now with China? Because that's where we're at with China. We're in 1938.
I want to sell.
They haven't invaded Poland yet, but it's on the horizon.
I want to sell as much as we can. We know that the demand for protein around the world is continuing to grow at a rapid rate, whether it's India, China, or throughout the developing world in Africa and the Middle East. The reality is we are the best suited to meet that demand. But again, it's trade for the United States. It's something we can sell, and we need to bring it back home. But again, we're not going to maintain that competitive edge unless we start protecting our own
Mr. Tom,
intellectual property.
I understand my time has expired. I just want to tell you that if I had the choice to sell food and give aid to Hitler in 1938, I would not have done so. With that, I yield back.
Someone's time expired. I'm going to take the liberty here as we close out to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Votes have been called probably about 8-9 minutes ago, so we've got a fair amount of time left on the clock, and even after that clock when it winds up. So one quick question. Mr. Alley, your testimony highlights the recent GAO report and the issues USDA faces with AFIDA. You also mentioned that foreign agriculture land holdings within the United States have increased 30% since 2019. Outside of the recommendations within the report, can you expand on other changes Congress should look to address the gaps?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a very good question. I think, in terms of the reporting that's being done, I think what's interesting to me and what I've seen in government and in the private sector in terms of the way China's doing some of its investments, it's doing it in very complex ways, either through private equity entities where there are limited partners versus being general partners. So I think capturing that complexity of that reporting in terms of ownership would be very useful, and also in terms of land use. But I think the recommendations of the GAO are useful as a starting place, but looking at how the Chinese are structuring that investment and where they're doing it in directions that can't be caught is important, and where they're declaring their ownership in the other land category should be examined.
Well, before I yield back my time, I'd like to address the gentleman from Massachusetts' comments. We're all aware of California's oppressive Proposition 12 mandate, as well as similar mandates from states like Massachusetts. And I'm sure you all have also heard me say that I want a fix for these mandates. While my colleague may think this is a done deal, the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that Congress can, and quite frankly, my reading of the opinions, should address this. We do have a farm bill that's coming up here, hopefully in the very near future. It is, and because of the communications that the Supreme Court did in their opinions, they made it that abundantly clear that Congress has the ability to address the interstate commerce chaos that we have seen arise since their ruling. Now, I'm a strong supporter of states' rights, and I acknowledge that sometimes state laws can have limited extraterritorial effects. But any state or local laws that control production outside of their jurisdictions are inherently harmful to interstate commerce. The EATS Act and similar proposed fixes would not restrict states from creating laws for their residents. It would just ensure that American farmers outside of those jurisdictions would continue to be allowed to produce according to the standards of the state that they produce in. Any other characterization of what these proposals would do is false and misleading, and is quite frankly a stain on this committee's work. And to specifically address the comments related to China, no one has made any sort of coherent argument explaining how one state dictating to another how to farm helps out China. China didn't ask for the help. Farmers have asked for the help. And while my colleague from Massachusetts was ranting about China's influence on my decision making, my staff at that point were meeting with over 30 American pork producers who all asked for a Prop 12 fix in order to continue running their family-owned operations. Now, I'm trying to have a serious policy conversations while some of my colleagues are standing behind a convenient straw man instead of coming to the table and finding solutions. I've committed to finding a fix that benefits American producers and no one else, and I intend to find one. That concludes my questions and now, closing statements. Thank you so much to our witnesses. Just a wealth of information that you have shared with us. I think it's insightful, it's helpful, very specific thoughts and recommendations that we need to be pursuing. As always, thank you to our staff, that really our personal office staffs, our committee staffs who do such great work to help make sure that we do these types of hearings successfully. Food security is national security, and food production acreage and food processing that is influenced through the purchase or theft of intellectual property influenced by the Chinese Communist government is a significant risk. There must be legal consequences that serve as a deterrent and a preventative measure, and we've heard many, I think, really solid recommendations today that we need to continue to build on. So, safeguards are warranted. Even outside of this committee, I'm very proud to, within the education workforce space, we've have proposed introduced a bill that would create a pilot for incorporating cybersecurity into career and technical education. We need people with those skills to be on the front line. You know, we talked about the massive data of agriculture, and those systems need people that are working on in the development and the maintenance of those who have great cybersecurity skills. So there's a broad width of solutions here that and certainly having people with the right skills to do our best to be able to prevent the stealing of intellectual property. That's just one small example. So we need to encourage USDA to aggressively work on, I believe as well in this space, we need to encourage USDA to aggressively work on new trade agreements in new markets for our agriculture commodities to manage future risk. We must strengthen our investment in both agricultural research and, quite frankly, their trade programs, foreign market development, and our market access program. We need to encourage, I believe, trade language for USTR to be able to be equipped with that would do our best to prevent retaliatory in trade agreements, retaliatory tariffs on American agriculture commodities, because anytime there's a trade war, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is American agriculture. I remember first coming here under the Obama administration, there was a problem with, I believe it was Chinese manufactured tires. They were creating some type of accident risk. I don't remember what it was specifically. So we imposed a tariff on these tires, or the Obama administration did, and in response, China put a tariff on our chickens, ducks, and turkeys. I think it's immoral that any country, including the United States, would do retaliatory tariffs on such an essential thing as food. And we ought to look at language that somehow we could at least promote within the trade discussions when, and I will say, when the tariff disputes are completely unrelated to agriculture. So once again, to our witnesses here today, thank you so much for your service, for your expertise, and for joining us here. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture is adjourned.